To what extent is the pandemic accelerating Singapore's 5G adoption?
Well, I think, first of all, this is an important milestone in our 5G effort towards building a world-class, secure, and resilient 5G ecosystem in Singapore. And with this provisional award, we are on track to have 2 standalone 5G networks that are nationwide in their coverage by 2025 and to have 50% coverage by 2022. And I think this particular point in time, I think this investment and this announcement takes on added significance for a couple of reasons. The first is, I think that what you see now is an environment where the importance of the digital economy, because of telecommuting, because of home-based learning, and different modalities of doing business, the importance of digital economic connectivity and the infrastructure that supports it has taken on added significance. So this is an investment in Singapore's digital economic future. And the second point I would say is these are substantial investments being committed by telcos at a time of uncertainty. And I think it speaks to the confidence that businesses have to the long-term economic potential and also the potential of 5G in Singapore's context. So I think it's an important part of the overall effort in making sure that Singapore is digital future ready, and it takes on added salience in the context of the COVID-19 situation, where the need for such digital economic infrastructure takes on added salience.
Minister, quantify that for us, put that in perspective. How much of a boost will 5G provide the economy? Which sectors will generate the most revenue for the 5G providers as well?
So I think the challenge in quantifying it is because the use cases for 5G are still evolving. But what I would say is this: it's quite clear that the business use cases in the transportation sectors like the ports, the aviation sector, in the areas around management of estates, smart estates, and so on, and in terms of the movement of people, etc. There's a whole range of these sorts of business-oriented applications and use cases, which I think are going to anchor the initial value proposition. There are also consumer-facing use cases, which will also, I think, become more important in the years ahead. This is also why IMDA has been working with a range of partners, telcos as well as other solution providers, in order to work on use cases which can anchor the value proposition. So it's not just a supply-side initiative in terms of creating the infrastructure, but it's also about working on use cases, because the demand side is going to be key for the commercial value proposition.
But Minister, this is a huge investment for 5G service providers. We're talking about billions of dollars. Surely there must have been some calculations made in terms of revenue that can be generated by 2022, 2025. What kind of numbers? Give us some kind of indication.
I think the telcos would be in a better position to answer this with more specificity. But let me just sketch out some broad metrics. First of all, this is a license for 15 years. So it is not about recovering the investment or accruing the returns on the investment in the first 2 to 3 years. It is about taking a long view and establishing the value proposition. The second point I would make is, in terms of the order of magnitude of the investment, well, I think if you take reference from what has occurred around the world, it will have something, that will probably run into hundreds of millions and probably billions of dollars in a cumulative basis. The third thing I would say is, because of the way it is being staged out, where 50% coverage by 2022 and thereafter 2025 for nationwide coverage, it also allows the telcos to space out their investment flows in order for the development of the assets and the infrastructure. So I think there is enough flexibility, and in terms of the tenor of the investment, it is long enough, I think, to take a long view to recoup not just the investment, but actually attain significant returns on
Maybe this is a question that the government can answer in terms of how much is the government collecting from the allotment of the spectrum?
So we had specified, and I think the clearing price for the spectrum in this round, in other words, both parties will pay $55.01 million. Now that, if you do an international benchmarking, comparing it with, if you normalize it for population, for duration of the license, plus the spectrum, 100 megahertz that we are awarding, it is somewhere in the median of international benchmarks. The key point also I want to emphasize is, from the very outset, our focus has been not just about getting a return in terms of what is paid for the spectrum. It is actually in terms of the overall investment that the telcos undertake in order to maximize the benefit to our economy. So the price that they pay was only 15% of the overall calculation. What was in fact weighted more heavily was what value they can bring in terms of value-added solutions to businesses, in terms of solutions for consumers. And this was an important part of the overall evaluation in deciding what value they bring.
Minister, are any of the telcos planning to use Huawei equipment in their 5G implementation?
We have not specified any vendors, and in fact, our approach has always been to emphasize, at the system level, our requirements in terms of security and resilience, and any telco providing the network will have to meet IMDA's regulatory requirements on that score. And then we've also wanted to ensure that there's vendor diversity, so have a certain level of resilience in the system. And on the second part, on vendor diversity, based on the short list of vendors that the telcos have made available to IMDA as part of the CFP process, it's quite clear that we will have vendor diversity in our system. No specific vendor has been excluded.
Can 5G...
Go ahead.
Can 5G networks, including that of Singapore, provide a high level of service or performance without Huawei?
I think that's a technical question, and it's best put to the telcos. But I think this is where, in the process, there will be technical evaluations, and I think the telcos will have to evaluate the solutions put forward by the various vendors. I would point out that not just Huawei, but the others like Ericsson and Nokia are also vendors for 5G systems around the world. And so I think in the end, it's going to come down to, on the one hand, the evaluation from a commercial perspective by the telcos. On the other hand, they must meet their obligations under the CFP proposals and the regulatory requirements in terms of security and resilience that IMDA has specified.
Minister, before we let you go, a question on the virus. When we spoke about a month ago, Singapore had about 160 cases. Now Singapore has the most number of cases in Asia after India and I forget the other country right now. But I mean, when we talked, you talked about how Singapore must not be complacent in the way it manages the virus. Has Singapore been complacent when it showed a low number of cases?
No, I think that's hardly the case. In fact, we have taken this with the utmost of seriousness. And whether it is the effort that we have made in terms of the restrictions on travel, the safe distancing and other restrictions in terms of the domestic population, and also the work we are now doing with the foreign workers, the migrant worker community in Singapore, all of this has been taken with the utmost of seriousness. I would say that all our steps have been informed by the science, the data, and then the trade-offs that are involved in making all the relevant decisions and imposing them on the society and on our economy. And I would say that going forward, we remain resolute. Our objective is to curb the spread of this virus in Singapore, as is the objective of governments around the world. And we are sparing no effort in that regard. And that is also why we have extended the circuit breaker in Singapore till the 1st of June. And we think that with the cooperation of businesses and the population, we should be able to overcome this.